Okay, William Hale here in Louisa, Virginia. I do something called All Farm Organics, which is partly a seed and grain producing farm, and also my most important cash crop is compost, which I make from several different ingredients that I'll tell you about. But the main thing to know about compost is the nose. But if it smells good, if it smells like you just went into the deep woods and picked up a handful of loose, rich soil under the trees, that's what you're looking for. So let's go take a look at something else that I can show you in my stockpile of ingredients, and we'll take it from there. So when you're making compost, what you're doing is putting together a recipe of carbon and nitrogen materials. And so in my case, the nitrogen material is the leftover soybean pulp from making tofu. The Japanese term is okara. This is a very high carbon to nitrogen to carbon ratio. It's probably 1 part of nitrogen to 6 parts of carbon. That's more nitrogen than you need to make compost, because you want basically a 30-to-1 ratio. But that's what I start with here for my nitrogen. So if you got your nitrogen, then you need your carbon part of the mix. And this is, of course, wood chips, which are very high carbon relative to nitrogen ratio, probably several 100-to-1. So you're going to mix a certain percentage of your 6-to-1 material into your 400-to-1 material to get about 30 to 40-to-1. You do the math. I'm not going to do it for you here, but there's also another way to do it, which is to just put materials together and mix them really well. Make sure they have some moisture in them, about like a squeezed out sponge. Not so you can squeeze water out of them, but so that they'll feel damp to the touch, which this does. This is almost entirely wood chips. This has had a few other things mixed in with it. I use lots of other materials. I use waste hay, which is probably more like a 70 or 80-to-1. Dry hay is carbon to nitrogen ratio, so it doesn't take much nitrogen to make that into good compost. This will take a long time. It takes me about 6 months to process this into good, fine compost like you saw in the first pile. So there are a lot of different kinds of materials that you can use to make your compost, and there are some industrial materials that are good if they don't have chemical contamination. In fact, this is paper mill sludge that doesn't have any chlorine in it. They don't bleach the paper at this particular plant. And so this is a wonderful material that's much like insulation that you would find, chopped up newspaper insulation. It actually has a 44-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. This is very easily available where I am here. You just have to depend on finding whatever is around you to make the compost. But I add a little bit of the other materials to it, because what you really want to make good compost is a lot of microbiological diversity. This stuff, as you might imagine, coming out of a paper mill, has almost no microbiological life in it at all. Neither does the okara coming out of the soybean manufactory. And the wood chips do. They have lots of natural microorganisms, some macroorganisms that help in the decomposition. So my aim in the end is to give you the most highly microbiological active material as possible, with all the elements that you need, or most of the elements that you can get for growing plants. And so we just are constantly experimenting with whatever is available to us. And the key is to get as much stuff as you can, as cheaply as possible, and put it all together in the right order. And this is all aerated and watered as needed. I use a particular machine to do that. It's made for the purpose, but you can do it with a pitchfork, you can do it with a front end loader. So almost anybody can make compost, and it's my firm belief that the farms of the future will almost always have a composting operation included with them.